Welcome to A Life Without Parole. I have been following the Chad Daybell case from the beginning, every single bit, and I want to talk about what happened in the court for the past week. I have been taking notes of all the things that seem very significant, and maybe I have a different perspective than some people, but there was one thing in particular today that was absolutely shocking, and I I literally had to catch my breath. I couldn't believe what happened. And I'm going to tell you about that in just a minute. But I want to try to go kind of in order of what happened in the case. The first thing that I want to talk about, I've done a lot when it comes to Chad Daybell and his children. And I've put it out there, do they believe, do they seem to be supporting their father, but do they actually believe all the things that he's saying and that he's innocent? And I'm going to touch on that. It won't be my main focus, but we found out a few things in the trial that helps me to understand a little bit more about that. And I'm going to talk all about that. So please like, subscribe, and share this out. And don't forget to give me a thumbs up. It helps my algorithm so much. Let's get started. Okay, one of the first things I want to talk about is if or whether or not Chad believes it. I put it out there on my last video, and a lot of you voted. Thank you so much. And many of you said, yes, you think he believes it. Or many of you think he's just a con artist. And everything in between. I got a lot of comments and a lot of information, and I actually got some inside things from people who are very close to Chad Daybell. I'm going to give that in a future video. I just need to verify it first, but it's interesting. But the first thing that goes through my mind is if he believes it, if Chad believes it, and if he doesn't. So here, I have arguments for both, but this is something that I find really interesting. I was thinking about as I was studying about true crime, and one thing that I've learned over the years, and that is if someone is deemed incompetent, then they're not held responsible for their actions, correct? Now, in Idaho, that's not a defense. You can't be deemed incompetent. You can still stand trial. So I'm not talking about the law in Idaho, but I'm talking about an actual incompetent person who does something to harm somebody else. And one of the surefire signs that they're incompetent, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, you'll understand in just a minute, but is the surefire sign is that they don't try to hide what they did. They're incompetent. They don't even realize they did something wrong. Now, I find that really interesting because I'm not talking about Chad Daybell being incompetent, because nothing suggests that he's incompetent. But when I think about, does he really believe his own rhetoric? The whole, I know, like, I'm being told because I'm a prophet that that person's a zombie, so that person must die. Does he believe it? That it comes from God and he's just doing what he should do, etc. Well, my question is, my thought process is, if he does believe it, why does he hide it? Why does he go to such great lengths to hide it? That's something. And the different things that showed up in evidence this week on the trial, both things that the jury will see and things that we found out that were not in front of the jury and will not be able to be seen by the jurors, but we're going to talk about those things too. So I'm not going to make this too long. I just want to do some of the highlights of the week. So the first thing is, got my notes. The first thing is when Tammy was told some friends that Chad wanted her to up her life insurance policy. Now, this is something that's interesting. This is hearsay, right? The people are talking about something that Tammy said. Tammy can't say it on the court because she is no longer alive. So there's sometimes when those things can be said, but I do find it interesting that she, says, Chad wanted me to up my life insurance policy. Was he preparing? Well, I'm going to be non biased, right? Well, I'm going to try to be. It seems very suspicious. Let me just put it that way. But the thing of it is that was not, they were not able to use that testimony in front of the jurors. So that's something that we know that someone claims Tammy said, but the jurors won't know it. And I don't think they're going to need it, but it's just something that's interesting. You lock that away in your head. The second thing is Tammy had said to a couple of people that my husband Chad says I'm a zombie, and I'm not a zombie. Does that sound familiar? The same thing happened with Tylee. She had told people, Mom says I'm a zombie, but I'm not a zombie. That was not able to be used in front of the jurors, but we know it. The third thing that was able to be used was the comments that people overheard Tammy say, which is, I never have felt better. There's a lot this week about how Tammy was in good health, even though Chad gave a bunch of different stories. Almost every time he told it to somebody, he told a different story. Oh, it was a heart, it was an embolism, it was she choked, she, like all these different coughing fit, whatever her cause of death. He came up with so many different stories, which in and of itself, interesting. Okay, so as I was thinking about that, it's interesting to me. I think the most interesting person of all of Chad's children is Emma. And it's a mystery to me. Does she believe her father? Did she love her mother? Does she think her mother was a zombie? Like all these things. I can't quite tell. And there's arguments for both sides really right now, but if she really truly believed her father and she was buying into it and she thought her mother was a zombie, then why wouldn't you just say that instead of hiding evidence? It's still, she kind of is doing the same thing as Chad. Now, is that part of that psychological influence that happens to children when a parent kills another parent? I did a video about that prior, and check that out if you want to know the details of why that happens. I'm mystified by Emma. After the whole paintball gun incident, her mother was obviously very upset about it. She thought it was a paintball gun. It appears that she started to second guess herself. What if it wasn't a paintball gun? And then she was afraid to go out. And it makes you wonder, why wasn't Emma thinking, we already had that paintball incident? I mean, it just seems like she would be thinking like the rest of us, but obviously that is not how she thinks. But I still think, if Chad believes, he really believes all of this, that he is getting inspiration about zombies and who needs to be killed and all of that. If that is the truth, why is he now throwing mud at Lori? I mean, that's the way I'm going to say it. Why is he throwing Lori under the bus? She was doing what he told him to do. And if he's really a prophet or a, multiple lives person and all that other stuff, why is he hiding it now? Now, as far as the testimony goes, it does show that at least on some levels, the Chad's children were believing his light and dark, like, that he can pray over something and it won't be, like at one of the son's cameras wasn't working right. So they claimed it was possessed and that Chad needed to pray over it. I mean, these are crazy things. And this is not your mainstream Latter-day Saint beliefs. And so they were, even though Chad and Lori broke off and did the Church of the Firstborn, their children were still members of their church, but they were obviously believing some of the things based on texts and emails. And I think it's interesting that Julie Rowe, who Chad wrote a book, published a book for her, she was excommunicated for saying similar things to what Chad ultimately started to say. So immediately Chad knows, yeah, I can't say this in front of the ecclesiastic people. It can't, only a certain little inner circle can I say it, or I will get excommunicated. And I don't want to get excommunicated because he was trying to play both sides. So if he really was starting a new church, the Church of the Firstborn, why would he care if he's excommunicated from the church he was pretending to be such a valiant member? That's an interesting thing in and of itself. Maybe he thought, in some ways, it seems like he thought he was going to take over that church. His new church would take over that one. I don't know. He'd have automatic lots of followers, I guess. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts about that. The thing of it is all the Daybells, I mean, as far as Chad, and obviously Lori, and apparently his children would talk that lingo that is part of the cult lingo. It's not part of, I said that, it's not part of the mainstream church. So they were believing at least some of that, just based on their own texts and lingo. Now, there was a lot talked about raccoons, that Tammy Daybell was sending emails to her son and talking about raccoons that they've caught in the night, and they've seen them, had a flashlight on them, but none of it was during the day. So, Chad, when he says he shot a raccoon and buried it in the backyard. I grew up in southeastern Idaho. I never saw a raccoon during the day. I mean, I suppose it's possible. I'd love it. If you are from southeastern Idaho and you've ever seen a raccoon out roaming during the day, let me know. I would love to hear that. Back to Emma. The thing that's interesting to me is the principal talked about how he saw that Emma and her mom raced in a race, and he thinks it was a 5K race. And this was not too long before she died. So, how can Emma say that her mom wasn't healthy if she was out doing the race? I just think there's conflicting stories here. The whole, how quickly they did the funeral and how they didn't want to have a service in Idaho, that was really icky. I don't know what else to say. Icky. And the fact that Emma asked the principal to basically take care of it, never heard of such a thing in all my life. I mean, that's really kind of weird. I just went through one of my close family members just had a funeral and for their spouse, and it was devastating, and it was very hard, actually. And I know everyone grieves differently, but it was very hard to put it together and to try to get your mind straight, because the mourning process, it's just hard to believe that you wouldn't want everyone who wanted to mourn to have the chance to mourn and to learn. I mean, it seems really weird. Okay, but I told you there was some like shocking evidence that was brought forward today. I mean, some of it was without the jurors knowing, but it was interesting. There was a real estate agent who was being interviewed on the stand, and during his cross examination, Pryor asked him about the square footage of Chad's property. And the real estate agent said, "Why don't you tell me it's your property?" And then, woo, sidebar, everyone, it's like, can this be a mistrial because he said that? I mean, and then that comment was stricken from the transcripts. The jurors were told to not even, to disregard it and whatever. But it's an interesting thing. Why would the real estate agent say that? Well, Chad Daybell has run out of money. He ran out of money a long time ago. So his attorney, John Pryor, now owns his house and his property in order to pay for his fees. In fact, now John Pryor is working for free because Chad's out of money. But it's interesting to think that Emma, Chad's daughter, is living in Chad's old house that is really owned by John Pryor. But that is not something that the jurors need to know because it can cause them to be prejudicial. So that was stricken from the whole court proceedings. And yeah, that was kind of a crazy thing. You could tell the agent wasn't loving John Pryor. But the other thing that we found out from this agent that really just was like, oh man, this was something that apparently in some of the backdoor meetings when the judge and the attorneys are talking about what is permissible and what is not permissible. There was something that was brought out that the judge had previously told the attorneys they could not bring up during the trial because it would be too prejudicial. But the way that John Pryor was interviewing this witness, the real estate agent, he opened the door to that testimony that was supposed to be no one talk about. And the prosecutors were able to put it out there, put it in the brains of the jurors that Chet, here's the part. This is the part that makes you go, whoa. And I don't know for sure if the jurors will catch on to what is being said in the underlying words or not. I mean, all of us that follow the case were able to catch on. And what am I talking about? I'm going to tell you. And that is that allegedly Chad was trying to basically subdivide his property and put one more house on his property, a trailer or a prefab. He wanted it done quickly as soon as Lori was out of jail. Now, at the time, Lori's kids had not been found yet, and Lori was in jail because she hadn't produced her kids. And so by then, here's Chad. That gets me into a whole nother subject, but here's Chad sitting at his house and knowing, allegedly, that they are closing in. Investigators are closing in. So the best thing that he could think of, apparently, was to put a house where those bodies were found. And if they put a house on it, then you won't be able to see the discoloration of the grass and all the things that show where a burial was and ultimately how they found the children. But I find it interesting that Chad, this is something that's shocking to me. Chad did not seem to care for his own kids, and certainly not his wife, from the texts and the calls that he was making. And the mean things that he says, like, I feel like I'm deadly under the stairs with these people, talking about his own kids and wife. As soon as Tammy died, he says, I don't want to, it's just too traumatic. I can't be in the house. So I'm going to be with a friend in Rexburg. Yeah, a friend. We know who the friend is. And then he shoots off to Hawaii and all of this. We know all this, but he's claiming he can't be in the house. But as soon as Lori gets arrested, boom, he's back in the house. No problem. Doesn't seem to be having that same kind of emotional feelings. And I don't know. It's interesting. And then as soon and to the point where he's ready to put another house. I mean, it'd be very good. Put down some footings, put a prefab on there. No one will ever find those bodies. So it does show, I mean, so whether or not the jurors pick up on that, that's something. And I think that possibly there might be more about that, but I don't know. I found it very shocking, very damning evidence that none of us, well, I certainly had never heard about before. And it could be another chink in that chain of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So let me know what you think, and I will stay on this as much as I can, and I will see you again soon. See ya.